Merry Christmas Eve, everyone. I am getting into the Christmas spirit too. Candy canes all aglow. Most of it disappeared inside my hot chocolate now. But it's a time for caroling, it's a time for hot chocolate, it's a time for a gathering of family, sharing, and it's also a time for miracles. Real quick, just wanted to say, Saturday, we had a nice surprise, a knock on the door, and a wonderful man that we knew from church had given us a whole thing of cans of vegetables and cake mixes and things. And then he said to come right back out when I put those up. Oh, and he also gave us a half gallon of milk, which we can always use around here. And then I came back out, and he had himself had two rotisserie chickens, small rotisserie chicken, which is one would have sufficed us, but we got two of them. So I thought that was a wonderful Christmas miracle. In a way, it's like this next story, where this lady, a single mom, in fact, I'll read it from here. Connie Casares, I think was her name. She said, I had just returned home from the bank where I had withdrawn just enough cash to get us through the holidays. Life was a struggle raising two teenagers as a single mom, while working two part-time jobs and taking college courses at night. I was exhausted. The light at the end of the tunnel sometimes seemed very dim indeed. I think we can all know what that feels like. I looked for a card or a note with a basket, because she's had a basket. All of a sudden she saw a basket on her porch with all kinds of delicious foods and everything in there. She could not find a note or a card, and the basket was filled with, as she said, with the brim with all sorts of holiday stuff, food stuff. But there was no card. Had someone entered my name into a Salvation Army charity without me knowing? Who knows? As she was excited, and then, she said, at that very moment I felt a ripple of guilt. Wasn't there someone else out there who needed it more? Yes, my kids and I were struggling, but my grandparents and Aunt Shirley, who was deaf, relied solely on Social Security and disability checks, sometimes pooling their resources to get by. At least I could always pick up an extra hours of work. And when I finished my degree, things would improve. So she decided to drive to her grandma and grandpa's house, and their little two-room house, and across the streets where her aunt lived. And she says, Merry Christmas, Grandma, and handed her the basket. Grandma was thrilled. Oh, thank you, Connie. We'll be able to have such a nice dinner this Sunday. This will really help us until our checks come in. But what about you? We'll be fine, I said, and after a short visit, I excused myself. I still have lots of chores, so I should head back. On the way home, thinking about Grandma's smile, I knew the basket had gone to the right place. But like Grandma said, what about us? I still worried about how I could afford to make Christmas special for my kids. Then I saw it. In front of my house, in the same spot as before, an identical Christmas basket, every bit as lovely as the first. Now that is definitely a miracle indeed, a double blessing. Just think, had she had kept it, which she would have rights to do, she would not have gotten the double blessing. And she would have felt bad, guilty, a little bit that maybe her grandparents and her aunt were doing a little without. So this way, everyone was happy. I love stories like that. And here's one. She said, the Christmas party had been wonderful. It was great. excuse me for the coughing, to be among friends on Christmas Eve, sipping eggnog, which I love, and singing carols. I was sorry it had to end. Finally, at a little past 1 in the morning, I got a cough today, I headed home. I was almost on the freeway exit when I saw the sign, closed for the night. Construction, please take alternate route. Alternate route? What alternate route? The 55 freeway was the only way I knew back home, and there weren't any detour signs. The next exit was coming up fast. Maybe this will put me on the right route, I thought, turning off. Big mistake. Now I was in the parking lot of a shopping mall. I drove in circles around the deserted lot, trying to get my bearings. I didn't have a GPS and I didn't have a cell phone, and at this hour on Christmas Eve, there wasn't anybody to ask for directions. I glanced at my gas gauge and groaned, almost empty. Another thing. Pulling into a spot, I shut off the engine. I leaned my head against the steering wheel. I hoped what I heard about miracles and Christmas was true, because I needed one right now. And all of a sudden, I felt a bright light shine on me. The Star of Bethlehem? No, just a street light on top of a pole that seemed to be sticking up from one of the used car dealerships that lined the street. I couldn't take my eyes off it. Maybe the lot has a night watchman, I thought. I drove slowly, staring at the light. There was something comforting about it, even if I didn't know what I'd find when I got there. I passed some buildings and trees, and the full lot came into view. The building next to it was dark, and there was no night watchman. But there was something that made me believe in Christmas miracles. Attached to the light pole was a sign that said 55 freeway straight ahead, which of course was the route she needed to go on the way back home. So she found it. And here's one where there was a massive pileup on Christmas Day of 2012 in Oklahoma City. 3 a.m., freezing rain turned the highway into a hazardous slip and slide. Cars and trucks spun out of control, quickly spiraling into an ugly 21-car pileup. And of course, usually with that, there were probably a lot of people hurt and maybe a few dead. But when the paramedics and the police and everyone arrived at the scene, they were shocked, because nobody was hurt, not a little, even a little bit. So, yeah, that was a miracle. And here's a story that back from 1931 on Christmas Eve, and Ed and Julie Stewart had left their home in Tucson, and they were driving to Phoenix to visit relatives for the Christmas holiday. Just as dust was settling over the southeast Arizona desert, they had a blowout of their tire, and they had to pull over. Well, she got out to stretch her legs as her husband was changing the tire, and she heard something. Well, her husband was done about that time, so he came over and helped with her to investigate that, and they saw a shoebox out in the middle of the desert. And inside the shoebox was a baby girl, red hair, blue eyes. Of course, they took her to the sheriff, and they put her in a place where this lady was running I think it said wet nurse or some kind of, sort of like a little adoption in between place, I guess. And eventually she got adopted, I think like a couple of weeks later. And she lived to be almost 87 years old. And she was put out there not long before this couple came, and they just happened to come at the time. And you know, in the nighttime in the desert, especially at that time of year, it's going to get cold. So those are just a few stories. And I want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas. And have a nice time spending it with family and friends. And Merry Christmas over and out.